as Jenny said, I'm going to present on the work of the Waters of Life project today, with particular focus on the work we're doing in the agricultural sector. So, for those of you who might not be familiar with the Waters of Life, it's an EU co-funded life integrated project. Integrated projects are a particular category of life project that focus on influencing policy ultimately and leveraging complementary funding. The main aim of our project is to develop measures for the protection and restoration of high status objective water, rivers particularly. There are two categories of high status objective rivers. There are those that are currently at high status and have to maintain that status, but it also includes those that have fallen below high status and have to be restored to high status by 2027. Currently, less than half of our high status objective rivers are achieving that status. The significant pressures acting on high status rivers are well understood at this stage. The primary pressure is hydromorphology, followed by agriculture, with forestry, wastewater and extractive industries also featuring. How these manifest in the rivers is also well understood. We see changes to the physical habitat, excess nutrients, excess fine sediment, changes to the flow regime. Our project is working in 5 demonstration catchments and a 6th catchment acting as a control. The locations of the catchments are shown here, and these were chosen because they represent the range of pressures and issues acting on high status rivers generally across the country. In the Avonmore and the Graney, the primary pressure is forestry. In the other 3 active demonstration catchments, the primary pressure is agriculture. Manifests differently. In the islands, it's fine sediment and hydromorphological changes. In the Shorelock and the Ardbeg, nutrients are the primary significant issue. But all of these catchments show some degree of hydromorphological pressure. The project works under 6 pillars, so we are implementing measures under these 6 pillars and reporting to the EU under these pillars. In reality, there's a lot of crossover and linkages with the pillars, and as I said today, I'm going to focus on what we're doing under the agriculture pillar. Our main measure here is our pilot agri-environmental program, and this program has 4 elements. It's got resource-based payments, action-based payments, which we call general actions, and supporting actions, which are similar to the non-productive investments and landscape measures in acres. And we also have a focus on education and awareness. So I'm just going to take you through these elements very briefly and then talk about what we found from the first full year of implementation of our program. Our results-based scheme very much built on the learnings of previous results-based schemes such as the Burn Project, the Pearl Mussel Project, the Wild Atlantic Nature Project. But we also incorporated some of the learnings from the development of the Acres Cooperation Project. We consulted very widely with stakeholders and specialists in the area. And we used existing scorecards as our starting point, but we adapted them to be more focused on hydromorphology, particularly the elements of hydromorphology which are within a landowner's control. We introduced 4 semi-natural habitat scorecards, and you might ask why a water project is assessing terrestrial habitats. But in reality, where you have high-quality semi-natural habitats, these are reflective of low inputs, extensive management, and that can have a protective effect on nearby water courses. So in essence, the quality or the health of these habitats can be a proxy for water quality. Our scorecards in this respect are similar to Acres, but we have more emphasis on hydrology and drainage factors. Our payment per plot are similar, but we also have a riverside bonus where you've got good plot quality. We pay an extra bonus along the river. We realised that those scorecards weren't applicable to areas where farming practices were more intensive. So we introduced 2 new scorecards, a riverside scorecard on improved grassland and a riverside habitat on improved tillage scorecard. And the reason for this is that even on very intensively managed lands, an area of semi-natural vegetation, including trees, adjacent to the river can have huge benefits for water quality and for the river health. Trees in particular are really important. They provide shading to reduce temperature, something that's becoming more and more important with climate change. They provide woody debris, which in turn can provide important in-stream habitat and slow the flow. They provide leaf litter as food for aquatic insects. So that's why we're focusing on these areas particularly. They also increase catchment roughness and slow the flow and create corridors for wildlife. The factors we assess in these riverside scorecards are things like the fenced width on grassland or the uncultivated width on tillage. And we look at the complexity of the vegetation within those fenced or uncultivated areas. So we're not interested in specific species the way we are with the other habitat scorecards. We're more looking to see that you have all the different layers of vegetation present. So the low herbaceous layer, the shrub layer, the tree layer. And we are also looking very much at the presence of trees. We pay on the fenced or uncultivated width, but we assess a full 20 metres for damaging activities such as poaching, supplementary feeding points, drinkers, drainage. We'll pay up to 20 metres, but it's up to the farmer how much area width they give. The payment is very generous. It's €2,000 per hectare, and this reflects the high gross margin on these more profitable and intensive enterprises. Another thing to note on our Riverside Habitat scorecards, they assess several elements of the River Hydromorphological Assessment Technique, or the RAT as it's known. They look at bank structure and stability, bank and bank top vegetation, and riparian land use within 20 metres. And that's important because when sites fail, when potentially high status sites fail to achieve a high RAT score, these are the three elements that are the primary drivers. The next two elements of our scheme are general actions, supporting actions, were very much informed by this document. The framework of measures and best practice guidance for high status waters was produced early in the project. It's accompanied by 5 sectoral annexes which draw together and catalogue the range of measures that are available to deal with the specific issues from each of these sectors. What was new and different about these annexes is that they ranked the effectiveness of measures from high to low to not effective for each issue based on the drainage scenario. So this is the list of general actions that we pay farmers for under the project. And we introduce these because some issues, such as nutrient and sediment loss, don't readily lend themselves to a results-based approach. So I'm just going to talk a bit more about some of these, not all of these. The runoff risk assessment is very similar to the rainwater management plan in the Farming for Water EIP. It's a whole farm assessment. It's based on the source pathway receptor model. It combines a desk study which is carried out through our web portal and where an advisor can access all of the map data on the catchments in one place. They can look at the PIP maps, the flow paths, the flow delivery points and other features. And then it's supplemented with a site visit where they can capture additional data and ground truth what the desk study told them and report it through our smartphone app. The idea is to identify risky areas on the farm for loss of nutrients or sediment and to propose supporting actions to deal with the risks identified. Our nutrient measures were primarily focused on our 2 core catchments where nutrients, particularly nitrate, were a significant issue. In our Shorner catchment, for example, it's a catchment with shallow free draining soils, so it's inherently nitrate leaky. It's a dairy catchment and approximately 1/3 of the farmers are in derogation. The LawPro, as it was then, local catchment assessments carried out on behalf of the project estimated that the nitrate load leaving the Shorner catchment was around 1,200 kilograms of nitrogen per day. The reduction needed to get down to the 2.6 milligram per litre statutory estuarine limit is about 600 kilograms per day. So to put that in context, that's about 20 kilograms per hectare per year across the entire catchment. That's about 1/5 of a livestock unit. Or if we take just the riskiest areas for nitrate loss, the PIP N rank 1 to 3, it's about 30 kilograms per hectare per year, or 1/3 of a livestock unit. So our measures to help reduce nitrate losses are AgNav. This is a system developed by Board BN Teagasc. It calculates a farm gate N&P balance using relatively freely available data. It has a forecasting tool that allows the farmer to scenario test different strategies for reducing nutrient surpluses, and it provides a farm-specific action plan. I suppose a point to note about AgNav is that it doesn't currently allow for clover fixed nitrogen. Clover in the sward is an excellent climate measure, and it significantly reduces greenhouse gas emissions. But it does add nitrogen to the system, and research today would suggest that that nitrate is available for leaching. So its benefits from a water quality point of view are less clear. However, there is ongoing research in this area. The other measure we offer, and we particularly target this at our dairy farmers, is precision nutrient management using Pasture-Based Ireland and the Teagasc MOST grass growth model. Pasture-Based Ireland is first and foremost a grass measurement tool, or a grass management tool. But what it does is it captures very accurate, high-resolution data on rates of grass growth and fertilizer applications at a paddock scale. When you combine that data with local weather information, it can be used to populate Teagasc's grass growth model. And based on that model and local weather forecasts, Teagasc can give the farmer farm-specific advice on the optimum fertilizer amounts and timing. The next element is our supporting actions. So we have a suite of 33 supporting actions which can be selected by the advisor to either improve habitat or reduce sediment losses. The list of actions here was informed again by our framework document. And the final element is education and training. Any advisor who wishes to work on our project has to undergo mandatory training with the project. They get a one-day introduction to the project and to the principles of catchment science, a day on habitat scoring. We've run online training on runoff risk assessment to date, but are planning field training on that in the autumn. We have about just under 500 farmers in our project, and we've run induction with all of those farmers at this stage. They've been given a half-day introduction to the project's agri-environmental program and the reasons behind it. And we're also offering ongoing additional awareness and training events to them. So what have we found at the end of our first year of full implementation? I think these are three more extensive catchments, the Avonmore, Graney and the Islands. If you look at the total area of farmland and then the very far right, the total area of scored habitat, you can see in all of these catchments, particularly the Avonmore and the Graney, where agriculture is not a pressure, you have a very high proportion of the farmland that was categorised as semi-natural habitat that could be scored under the project. The islands has a bit less. What we found from our scoring was that the ecology was pretty good across all of the semi-natural habitats. They were scoring 6 to 7, so room for improvement, but not bad. The hydrology was good in the Avonmore and the Graney, but not surprisingly, we found that hydrology, drainage really, was a significant issue in the islands, particularly on peat soils, where we found a lot of active drainage, recently maintained, and issues with low water table in the peat. On our more intensive catchments, the picture is very different. Here you can see a very low proportion of the farmed area was considered to be scoreable semi-natural habitat, 5.5% in both cases. And that scoreable habitat was limited to those riverside areas and to some woodland and scrub. What we found was that the average width of the riparian zone on improved grassland in the Shornock was about 1.7 metres, so just above what's required under conditionality. And in the Ardbeg it was 2.5 metres on average. But I should add there were a number of outliers in the Ardbeg, and if they were excluded, the width would be very similar to the Shornock. In tillage, Ardbeg has quite a lot of tillage in the context of high status, and we found there the uncultivated width was about 5.7 on average. We didn't have any tillage farmers in the Shornock in the project. So what we learned from this, no surprises here, the presence of extensive, healthy, semi-natural habitats correlates with low nutrient levels in adjacent watercourses, and we would have expected that from the outset. Where you have extensive surface drainage, and where that is regularly maintained, you do end up with significant sediment problems. But we also found a kind of an issue with our scorecards. They weren't incentivizing in the original format the kind of improvements we wanted to see in the riparian zones. So we looked at them again and we realized they needed to assess more of the elements of hydromorphology in the riparian zone. But to do that, they needed to identify the type of riparian zone you would expect to occur in that particular situation, wetland or riparian woodland. And our scorecards now provide greater incentive for habitat improvement works in the riparian zone, including tree planting where appropriate. So this has led us to develop riverside versions of all of our semi-natural habitat scorecards, which are being introduced this year for the first time. In terms of the riverside habitat, really the width of the fenced riparian zones on grassland is unlikely to be sufficient to support conditions for high hydromorphological status. We've had very poor uptake of the measures to widen the riparian zone despite generous payments. That in part is due to the fact that we have been focused on farmer recruitment up to now, but from now on our focus will be very much on engagement and selling the measures. A good finding really was that on the uncultivated margin on tillage ground does provide the opportunity for significant riparian planting and enhancement of that zone. This is a summary of the general actions that we offered to farmers this year and the level of uptake. We had a good level of uptake on our runoff risk assessment. However, the quality was very variable, and in quite a high number of cases we had to go back to the advisor and ask them to redo the runoff risk assessment. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about our supporting actions. Our nutrient measures related to grassland, we didn't have good uptake, but we had really good uptake on the catch crop and mint hill. A point about our catch crop: we only offer non-leguminous species on the basis that the leguminous species add nitrogen to the system and are to some extent counterproductive. We will be engaging much more closely with our farmers on the nutrient measures and trying to get greater buy-in to those from now on. We had over 2,000 supporting actions recommended by the advisors through our runoff risk assessment and habitat scoring to a value of 1.4 million. These were all subjected to quite a rigorous approval process, and we've ended up rejecting over 50% of these actions. They were rejected for a range of measures. In some cases, no justification for the measure was given. In some cases, no obvious water quality benefit was there. In other cases, there may have been a marginal water quality benefit, but it didn't represent value for money. And in other cases, an alternative measure would have been much more appropriate. So in essence, we weren't always getting the right measure in the right place. I suppose the learning from that is there is a skills gap in the advisory, and I think this is acknowledged at this stage in relation to catchment science, and there's a poor understanding of the source pathway receptor model and the concept of the right measure in the right place. We also found that advisors were quite influenced by what the farmer would like to put in, rather than having a strict focus on water quality. But we also saw some faults on our side. We realized we needed to be more prescriptive about what measures would work where. So for example, in the island, simple things like allowing drains to naturally revegetate, raising the water table, fence the animals out of water courses, providing alternative drinking points, riparian planting. Those are the measures we need to see at scale to actually achieve the improvements we need to achieve. We need to provide better guidance materials, and we need to be very tailored in the training we provide where we observe a need in the advisory service. Through our inductions with farmers and the feedback we got from them, we realized that there was a disconnect between landowners and the rivers in some areas, particularly the more intensively farmed catchments. So there's a job to do there to reconnect landowners with the river environment. So the key takeaways from our first year would be essentially results-based schemes do have a role to play in delivering for high status, but you do need to have riverside-specific scorecards, and there needs to be a greater emphasis on the elements of hydromorphology that are within a landowner's control. Results-based schemes are not sufficient to deal with nutrients where nutrients are a significant issue. We have a limited range of measures available for dealing with nitrate, particularly on grassland. Essentially, a limited range of supporting actions will have the most effect in a given scenario and provide the best value for money. Advisors are absolutely key to the success of this, but we need to address that skills gap. And finally, we need buy-in from the farming community through awareness raising, clear and consistent messaging, and appropriate incentives. Thank you very much.
Waters of Life is co-funded by the LIFE programme of the European Union.